Okay, here we are with Piacenza. It's a Europa Simulation game. So far, all the games that I've picked up from them, I found were pretty good. I've got another one somewhere. Don't I? Do I have another? Yeah, I have El Gran Capitan, which is nothing. It's the follow-up of, where do I have it? It's got to be here somewhere. I can't even see it. I can't see anything anymore. It's a quote, and I get confused because it's not nothing gained but glory. It's nothing lost but honor, or something like that. And I can't see it in here. It's got to be there. Damn it. My eyes are so bad now. My glasses are all scratched up, which is part of it. Anyway, they have the Guelphs and Ghibellines. So far, I've been pretty happy with what their production quality, their rules, etc. This one I'm a little iffy about. It has mostly to do with the rulebook and some of the presentation and representations. The map I find actually very, very attractive. This is what a Barber map should look like. You know, it's not. This is a Nicola Cantardi's map, but it's in that same sort of simple style and everything. It's a little bit more readable, and it actually kind of just looks like a period map drawn, you know, of the era. A little more color, but you know. So, what do you get with this? Well, you get a bunch of counters. Not a huge amount, but a bunch. It's a small map. It's got a very, very nice texture to it. It's not exactly the same as the Clash of Arms maps, but it has a definite texture to it that is very nice. And with a smaller map like this, you can get enough weight on it and everything. If it actually lays fairly flat, so you get kind of the best of both worlds with something of this nature. Number of player aids. The game is in both Italian and English, which is kind of interesting. Like, I'm used to, you know, the German games or whatever, putting out an English edition, a German edition. Sometimes having both in the same thing. Obviously, with the Azure Wish stuff, the English edition was kind of a, I don't know. It was kind of printed at a low quality level. I think the French editions were too, though. Like, I picked up Grand Cycle, and it was the French edition only. I don't know if there was an English edition. And it was the same quality of print job, which was kind of, I had kind of assumed they just did a sloppy job in putting the English edition out. Nah, they're all like that. And so you have double copies of everything here. So for example, here's the Italian version of this. However, it's on the reverse side of the English copy of the combat tables. And then here you have the terrain effects chart in Italian on the opposite of the English side of this. And then the Italian combat table on the opposite side of that. It's a clever scheme. It's a little confusing when you first look at it. I was like, oh, the setup's only in Italian. Well, that's okay. It doesn't really matter. The setup itself was very, very painful. to cope with, and I'm not sure I got it right. I've got some things that I just don't know if they're even supposed to be where they are. So this unit maybe is not supposed to be there. It may. Let's see, do I have 2 cav? Yeah, I have 2 cav. Let's do this. That would be legal. And would avoid my problem, right? And then this would go here, I think. I don't know. Anyway, the only setup you have is really follow the images on here and try to get them correct. I also found some of the color choices a little hard for my poor eyes. I got myself, for example, confused between Cerboloni and Lucchese here. I see obviously they are not the same, but I had the leaders switched between them based on the coloring. The coloring scheme is actually really confusing because what you have on the units is the wing is represented by this little triangle here, which looks a lot better on camera than it does in real life. It's almost invisible in real life. But on all the other units, you see a little colored thing. That indicates what wing it's part of. The color up here indicates what unit it's part of. And the designation for artillery is not even really described here. It's this little symbol is the artillery pieces. It was pretty obvious once you start setting it up that, well, there's got to be something there, and artillery aren't noted anywhere and whatever. But I just found it very, very difficult to use only a pictorial, especially for something this complicated. Now, this has scenario 2 here, scenario 1 line. I don't know what the hell those are for. When I look at the rule book, we'll get to more a little later, but I want to go into my gripes about the setup. This is not the one that has it. Okay, we'll keep looking at stuff. This is something very interesting here. Again, like I said, the rule book printed in Italian as well as in English. I'm missing a piece. Okay, I will be back. I thought there was I swear that there's another book that I'm not seeing here. Anyway, there is a scenario here, learning scenario, scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, which gives what looks like more of a setup. Might be a little confusing there. I don't see scenario 3. I'm assuming scenario 2 is in this part of the map or something. I did not look at these. These are all short scenarios, and you know, you've got setup as in the campaign game. Oh. I don't know. I didn't try to deal with these because they confused me too much. And I have to say the presentation and the rules was somewhat confusing too. Some of it may be language. As far as I can tell, there's no credits for a translator, which can often get in the way when there's a translator. The author himself is at least bilingual. I feel like I'm missing something. Like there was some other rule book or something that I had in my hand, and I don't know where it is. Let's see what we got here. Rules booklet, complete OOB. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the about this. So I didn't really look through this very much, but it is of interest. So it's got the orders of battle listed out in it. This would have been a good place to give information about setup. And then it's got images of all the different uniforms. Now the uniforms are actually somewhat reproduced on the counters. Okay. This is confusing. I always find it confusing when imagery is based more on the uniforms, etc. But even more than the uniforms being that way, there's different stances. So, I mean, look, there's different kinds of horses and whatever, but there's different stances. So, like, this guy is standing one way, this guy's standing another, this guy's another uniform with a different stance. I usually expect that information to be something that's conveying some information in the game. It's not in this game. All the imagery, the pictures on the counters, all that's for is for artistic purpose. Now, the different components. So for the regular units, you have two different values in general. You have, up here is the movement allowance, down here is the number of strength points in the unit. Number of strength points is for cav the number of squadrons available, for infantry the number of battalions, I believe. You have things like this little X here. That is just part of this green in the corner as far as I can tell. It's just something to indicate which command you're talking about. It's not, yeah, but then what's this? Oh God. Yeah, okay, I see why. These are the leaders though, and they don't have that. And I'm really not sure what's up. Oh, I know, no, that's to indicate Spanish units, which is absolutely unimportant and is already represented by the color of the piece. So the French are blue, the Spanish are yellow. There's no need to put a little Spanish flag on the Spanish units, but there is one on every Spanish unit, right? But not on the Spanish leaders. Just to make things more confusing. Okay. Right. And, you know, it's sitting over there in the corner and leads me to think that that's what it's for. You also have, you know, you have the fleur-de-lis for the French units in the same kind of position. So, yeah, okay, I see why it's there. But it shows up on the map, on the setup thing, as a little X. And it does not show up, the French units don't have a little fleur-de-lis, the Austrian units don't have a little shield or anything. Okay. For some reason, the Spanish units got some kind of special distinguishment, and they appear different to me because that X looks like it means something, in part perhaps just because of this. All right. So anyway, you have a movement and a combat strength, which is basically the size of the unit. Okay, that's great. Now, they go into, there are light troops that have an L. Infantry essentially includes line troops, some light volunteer troops indicated by an L, and grenadiers with a rectangle around them. I can find grenadiers. There's one right there. See a white rectangle around the combat strength. I don't think I found any L's. I was looking for them while I was doing the French forces. I just don't think I saw any. Now, I've got things like this. Maybe that's an L there. It definitely looks like something weird hanging off his gun. but it's not next to his strength. It's not something like that. There's no indication of what that's going to look like in the game. Are Warteliner supposed to be lights? Well, I guess I could look it up here. Warteliner is under Natacy. Yuki. Yep. Okay, that doesn't help. Natacy is orange. You would think you'd see him here. What's he part of? He's part of the yellow. The yellow is, oh, Natacy's the army commander. Okay, Lucchese. I'm looking for Lucchese. There we go. Warteliner, and it says light infantry. So I'm assuming that I'm going to have to be able to see these little L's here, which I have not noticed until just now, and be able to determine what light troops are from that. Not very descriptive. Not very descriptive in terms of what the counter is able to demonstrate. Okay, artillery have their own values, and it is also the same kind of setup. Movement on top, strength points beneath. It's helpful. For leaders, and we don't have a, let's break down the units very well. We have like an army or wing commander who will have a command range on his thing. Now, there's some values that are not present on the leaders that I know are in the game, and I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to cope with them. There are also things like the training die roll here. So this is really the differentiation of most of the units is going to be based off the training die rolls, which is just by nation and type of unit. And you can see all infantry have the same, all grenadiers have the same, all cav and artillery have the same, although there's an asterisk. Yes, there are dragoons. Okay, so not well determined, but if a unit has 2 cav pieces and an infantry piece, it is definitely a dragoon. There might be other things that are dragoons. There's mention of dragoons units that are too small to be represented by the infantry unit, because basically you dismount the 2 cav and put it as an infantry unit. I can see nothing that distinguishes dragoons from normal cav. Within the rules of the game, there is a distinguishment. The dragoons are not allowed to do some of the stuff that the normal cav is able to do. So, I don't know how I'm supposed to tell. I might be able to tell by looking through here. In the notes, but I sure the hell am not going to be looking up to see each cavalry unit if it's a dragoon. There should be some kind of notation on the counters themselves. Then you got things like this that look like they're some kind of unit. They're not. This is the staff, right? Yeah, I believe this is the staff marker for a leader. Now, as far as I can tell, that only comes on the board if the leader's killed. Then the staff and this flag come into play and can kind of operate as 2 separate leader markers. And each of these staff markers has a different word on it in a different language, none of which I speak. So here we have Fane, okay, great. But here we have Drapeau and Bandera. And I thought these were cav units and whatnot. They have the little flag on them, but then they don't really make sense. And the horse isn't charging and everything, and it kind of looks, well, this one is. How about that? The Austrian staff are much more active. They have charging horses, whereas the French and Spaniards are on standing horses. I don't know if that implies some sort of bias. Who knows? Okay. So then there are wing commanders, of which Nadasti is one of, and they give two values on them. A fire bonus here, this is where we're going to get into trouble, and a command range underneath. Then we get to formation commanders. Yes, here's the staff. Staff has a fire bonus and an SF. What's an SF? I don't know. I don't know what an SF is. It's a modifier, I think, to the TDR, which is your. Oh, it's the sergeant factor. Yeah. Okay. Now, the formation commanders have three values on them, not all of which are explained, right? The band at the top, corresponding to their formation to adequately have combat. The formation containing infantry units must be moved in lines, la la la. Lots of stuff there, but they don't tell me what's going on. It gets a fire bonus. Again, there's no little markers to tell me what's what, but if I look at this, I can guess that this is the sergeant factor, this is the fire bonus, and this 2R, that may just be what the formation is. And we'll see, if we look here, this one's LL, that appears to be the lettering here that's used within the book, within the uniform. And just a book that doesn't look like it's at all necessary for play, but is seeming to become more and more needed. It's the way to tell how something's a dragoon or not, for example. But anyway, when you set your dragoons up, you can set them up in either infantry formation, in which case they have one counter, or dragoon formation, in which case they have two. You have other cav units that have the same name that are in two counters that I don't think are dragoons. You have ones that are in one counter, some of which may be dragoons because there's a mention in the rules that some dragoons only have one counter, but there's no way to distinguish. Now, yeah, there's just nothing. They're like cav by their speed. All right. I'm going to swap batteries. We'll talk a little bit about the way about broadly how the system works, and then we'll dig into the rules. I just read them. I don't know if I fully have a grasp on them. I mean, I never fully have a grasp on the rules, right? But it helps me to read through them again, and I think it helps some players to hear the whole pile of stuff, even though it's mainly probably not too useful. But it helps me to say them out loud. Generally speaking, this is a tactical representation of a single battle. It's during the War of Austrian Succession, a period I'm interested in. Now, it's a little later than, it's late in the age of linear warfare, right? Not as late as 7 Years' War, but, essentially it's the same fixed standards as there. But like in Banish All Their Fears that we did a while back, this is going to actually represent linear warfare. I think one of my grumps about the Battles of the Age of Reason was for all the finickiness about moving units and everything, I don't know if it really took linear warfare into account. I've got to revisit those suckers. I know I misplayed the one that I played and really didn't like it. I had bought all all the ones I could get my hands on, and I still kind of want to get more. So, of course I do. Anyway, so let's take a look at how the sequence of play works. So this uses a pulsed activation system, but a kind of interesting one. Both players will pick a wing marker, and this is another use for these suckers. They pick a wing marker secretly, one that hasn't been used yet, and they roll an initiative die roll. Before revealing who's got what picked, the person who wins the initiative die roll decides whether they want to go first or they want their opponent to go first. Whoever's decided to go first has to reveal their counter and has to, I think, there's a weird wording when we get to it in the rules. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I think both are hidden until after the pick. The one that's to be activated is revealed and then activated. I may be missing something there, though. It may be that the intention is the winner gets to see both, gets to see his opponents, and then makes the choice. Because there's like this specific that if you win it and you didn't, and you picked your opponent, you don't have to show, or something like that, which maybe you have the knowledge of what the other person's picking. Again, but I didn't feel like the rules really nailed that down well enough to say either way. We'll get to it in the way the wording is, because maybe again I'm just missing something. But anyway, you roll. One wing becomes the active wing, and then it's allowed to activate and basically gets. This is the core to the system, but basically gets their move in fire combat and whatnot. Fire combat and melee are done at the same time. It's just a different choice as to where you want to deal with it. You're going to have to respect rules of linear formation for the infantry. You're going to have to cope with the idea of firing becoming less disciplined. Now, most games just give you like a disorder marker, maybe give you a penalty in fire. It is harsh in this game. Once you get, what is it, this fire at will marker. Is this it? No, that's a disorder. That's smoke. Yeah, you can get smoke too. Once you get this fire at will marker, the unit is basically no longer firing effectively. It can have no effect on the enemy. There's not volley firing or anything like that, and they're just plinking away, and it's, they're firing as rapidly as they can, but probably screwing everything up. It's kind of an interesting concept, because the drilled fire was absolutely integral to the period. It feels a little too harsh, but I don't know. I know less about the effects of this than maybe I need to. Then, after that first wing is completed with its movement and combat and whatnot, the second wing, the wing that was not chosen to go first, gets the same thing and gets to go. And then you put aside those wings and you pick from the remaining wings and again do an initiative roll. Now, after you get through all the wings, and each side has 4 wings, left, right, center, and a reserve, you hit a reorganization where units get a chance to roll against, and essentially a lot of what you're doing. So like when you fire, if you fire, so you have options when you fire. You can fire once or you can fire 2 volleys each turn. If you fire a second volley, you make a training roll. If you succeed in your training roll, you're fine. If you fail, you get this fire at will situation where you can't do anything anymore. And I mean, you're pressing the units harder. There's a number of other cases where you make these training die rolls to see what happens. Well, one of them is to recover your morale. You do that here during the reorganization phase. Smoke and changing markers are removed. Changing markers are these things. When you take casualties, changing allows you to essentially filter units from rear ranks forward in a particular unit and make up the casualties to avoid taking a hit. Then you mark the turn track, which is on here, on the terrain effects chart. Great. We haven't paid too much attention to the terrain effects chart. There are a whole lot of different terrains. I've dealt with some of them as I read them, but now I'm realizing, wow, those are going to be, like with the Barber maps, kind of hard to distinguish. Because, yeah, it just looks so... So luckily, there's a lot of different kinds of clear. But actually, the different kinds of clear are important. So like farmland here, which looks like it has a little hill in it or something. It also has a name, supposedly. So this. Those are spots that are important because they're places that basically the commander-in-chief can not be somewhere where there's not like a little house or something, I think. And I think that's what this represents, is somebody's little hut, their hovel. Because you're also allowed to be in towns and other, basically I think in any named location. Okay. But he's not willing to be in a tent. That would just be wrong. Okay. And at the end of the game, the Austrians have an automatic victory conditions that they can reach before that, but otherwise you check whether or not somebody reached their victory conditions. The victory conditions are kind of funky too. Essentially, the Franco-Spanish player picks 4 victory conditions out of, I think, 8, secretly. Those are his goals. He doesn't tell the Austrians ever. Well. And at some point in the game, he has to have achieved one of them. And then by the end of the game, his goal is to achieve 3 of the 4. 2 is a draw, and above or below, you know, is an Austrian victory or a greater victory for the Franco-Spanish. Okay. So here's actually what happens in the wing activations. The few de Bilbao are removed by die roll. You make your training die roll. That's the first thing you do. Then you move. Then you're allowed to bombard with artillery. Artillery only bombards. Even grape shot is considered bombardment. All fire is reciprocal, though. Reminds me a little bit of Ney versus Wellington and Wellington's victory. I still got to get Wellington's victory on the table someday. There's so many. And then the actual combat is done, which is both fire, melee, and charge. Well, all 3 of them are handled during that. Okay. That's my scrambled up kind of view at a high level. But the devil's in the details, and there are a lot of details. Dice, zeros are zeros. I love how they word this. 0 is and remains 0. Again, there are some like things that something like that feels like it's a not as familiar with English as you could be, but it's also kind of cute and funny. And it might have been intentional. Like, I wouldn't be shocked to see Richard Berg write that, right? We went over the sequence of play already. The wing activation, yep, we went over that. Okay, let's talk about commanders. We've got a break. I've got a break very shortly. Okay, the commander-in-chief has an unlimited movement allowance. However, they can only move into farmstead, farmhouse, chateau, village, named hexes. Once you've moved your CIC, he has to remain stationary for the next 2 game turns. Use spare markers to indicate this. Okay. Formation and wing commanders have a movement allowance of 6. See paragraph 5, movement. Okay. Wing commanders move at the end of the activation of their entire wing. The CIC at the end of the activation of any given wing once per turn. Yeah, once per 3 turns. Formation commanders move at the end of the movement of their formation and must always stay with or adjacent to a unit of their formation. The CIC and wing commanders have a command range written on them. I just wanted to make sure they're not all 12, and they're not. Expressed in number of hexes. That is actually number of hexes. You draw an imaginary line from the commander to his superior, counting the hex where the superior is, but not that of the commander. I don't think you can go through enemy. Yeah, it cannot pass through enemy-occupied hexes, forbidden terrain. If you can't draw a command line... Now, it's kind of like implied that it has to be a straight line, but I don't think that is. I think you can curve around stuff because you can't go through certain things. It is determined to be out of command. You do not want to be out of command in this system. The CIC, this will keep the wing commanders in command. A wing commander is in command if he is within the range. A CIC does not help with reorganization. Okay, great. Wing commanders. A wing commander controls every formation commander of his own wing that's within his command. By the way, the paper in this is also real paper and has a nice texture to it. It feels almost like a lighter version of what the map texture has. Really, really nice. Each player checks if subordinate field commanders are in command, tracing the command line. Each wing commander has a corresponding marker used to determine the activation order in the game turn. That is this. The out-of-command wing commanders cannot be activated in that turn, and their marker is temporarily set apart. Each wing commander has a fire bonus, which is this number, which corresponds, I guess, to this number. That will be used as fire modifier of a firing unit when the wing commander is adjacent to or stacked with a unit of his wing. The wing commander fire bonus supersedes any bonus provided by the field commander or formation commander. The formation commander are the counters with the symbol of the army and distinguished by a colored band at the top corresponding to their formation. And then they also have the wing little notch, whereas the wing commander doesn't have a notch. He has a whole stripe going down. To adequately have combat, a formation containing infantry units must be moved in lines formed by adjacent units side by side according to the schemes described herein. There's going to be a whole description of the line designation. And it seems pretty good, if maybe a little light and loosey-goosey, but I'm good with that. I know some people may not be. The formation commander can help with reorganization, can be stacked, and he helps because he has that sergeant number. Can be stacked or adjacent to a firing unit of his formation, giving its units his fire bonus, which again I guess is this. They also have a modifier sergeant's factor. Oh, here they tell you, blue number abbreviated SF. So I look at this, and I'm guessing that black number up there is actually blue. It has a tinge of blue to it. It's possible. It looks black to me on here, too. So, yeah, I don't know. Which must be subtracted from the die roll of adjacent or stacked units on training die rolls. They make it sound like it's a penalty. It's not. It's an advantage. You want to roll low on the training number below that number, and the modifier is a good thing. The formation commander may move at the end of his formation's movement, must always end with or adjacent to a unit of his formation. Okay. A formation commander who is in command extends that command to the units of his formation, as long as their units are adjacent to or within 2 hexes from the closest unit of the same formation. What are you trying to say there? So this is interesting. If he's in command, he extends the command. It sounds, the way it's worded, it sounds like he doesn't have a command range, which makes sense, because he doesn't. So yeah, remember, he has to be adjacent to or stacked with the unit of his formation. The rest of the formation has to be adjacent or within 2 hexes, 1 intermediate, of one another. If there's an intermediate counter, it can't be occupied by an enemy unit, but it can be occupied by a zone of control or by friendly units. Well, let's hold off on that because I think there's a contradiction elsewhere. There's no need for combat. When reading this, I wasn't sure what the hell it meant the first time, but now I feel like I'm getting the answer. There's no need for combat units to be within a certain distance of their formation commander, although this can facilitate movement in combat. A unit part of a formation without a commander or whose commander is out of command also, and suffers all the effects on movement, combat, and reorganization that being out of command will affect. A combat unit checks whether it's in command prior to movement, combat, and reorganization. An out-of-command commander cannot extend command to a subordinate commanders or units. These will all be out of command. Now, I don't know if there's an out-of-command marker in this game. I don't seem to recall one. Got disorders, we got melees, charges, disorders with fires. Yeah, we got out of command on the other side of the fire. If I really screw things up, we may have a lot of those markers on the board, and that'll be a problem. But you're not supposed to. You're supposed to keep your units in nice, clean lines. Where were we? Beyond this, his counter can act without other restrictions, movement, support, etc. The wing commander must check if it's in command at the time of its activation. A field commander checks if it's in command together with its own units before movement, combat, and reorganization of its own units. I actually don't think you need an out-of-command marker for the field commanders and their command, because you check each time. But it might be helpful to keep one out there just as a reminder, and there aren't very many, so I may have to make some or pull some from something else. Okay, capture of commanders. A commander is captured if the last piece that is in a hex together with enemy units following a melee or cav charge, or if it's solitary in a hex that has opposing combat units. The commander is turned back to the staff side. Okay. So here's the staff, and here's where we have a problem. I have a wing and I have this thing. This is not the staff. This is the flag, I guess. Okay, we'll get to that. It's turned back to the staff side and is placed with a unit from its own wing or formation. If the captured commander was already a staff, the counter is given to the opponent as a trophy. So you have to lose your leader and his staff marker. That'll be worth 3 victory points of field commander, otherwise 5. Now the staff standard bearer. In the case of the elimination of a wing commander, his counter is flipped to its staff side and the standard bearer piece appears in play. This is really weird. Like, you get your staff, which is sort of a weaker version of you, but you also get this, which feels very much like a formation commander in terms of its values. We'll keep talking about it. In the same hex as the staff with a movement capacity of 6. A flag bearer within the command range of the staff may command units of his wing within a command range equal to that of the staff. So the flag bearer is an extension to the staff. So this guy has a 10 command range. His staff only has a 6, but this would actually extend it out to 12 in one direction. Okay. Standard bearers do not offer combat bonuses, but they can aid in maneuver in case of training die rolls and in reorganization, which is interesting because this guy, your wing commander, has a fire bonus. Okay. The staff doesn't give him that, or the standard bearer doesn't give him that, but he doesn't have a sergeant's bonus, but this does. It's like, whoa, everything's kind of fucked up. In fact, they too have a TDR modifier, sergeant's factor, blue number, that must be subtracted, like it's something bad. And then there's a historical note. The sergeants or sergeants were non-commissioned officers capable of helping the troops in the field. Apparently who don't bother helping the wing commander, but they would help his subordinate because the wing commander is a bit of a dick in every case. A standard bearer is captured in the same way as commanders. Now remember, a field commander is worth 3, otherwise they're worth 5. Well, the standard bearer is worth 5. Now, well, no. Here's the thing. Losing your wing commander and his staff is worth 5. Losing a formation commander is only worth 3, and they have their own staff. Again, I think if the captured commander was already staffed, the counter is given to the opponent as a trophy. I think that just like deletes the command completely when that happens. But the flag bearer, so it takes two hits to get rid of, as with the formation commander, it takes 2 hits to get the points from them. But if you do 1 hit on him, if you capture that flag bearer, he's worth as many points as the wing commander plus his staff was worth. So 2 hits to get that, 1 hit to get that, and that thing might be in the line of fire or whatever. And it says it's captured in the same way, which I think means it's given to your opponent, so you no longer have it. It's quite possible that means to me that an entire wing could go out of command through some bad play. All right, let's go to commanders. Again, I'm having to assume these things. They're not spelled out for you, but it seems to be the consequences of what I'm reading. A commander in a hex with combat units forced to retreat for fire, melee, or charge must make a D10 roll. Now, remember, your formation commanders have to be on the board. Like, they have to be with the units, basically. Not necessarily stacked with them, but close enough that they could be in danger, even if they're not. On a 0, 1, or 2, it's turned to its staff side. If it's already on staff side, it's captured by the enemy, and the counter is given to the opponent as a trophy. Again, you're not going to have command for that formation anymore. On a 3 through 9, the commander is unharmed. In any case, not in any case, the commander's staff can retreat with the units. Not if he's dead, not if the counter's gone. Or it can be relocated to the closest unit of the same formation, if any. Otherwise, it's eliminated and earns victory points to the enemy side. So, yes, if that's the last unit of the formation that's gone, it seems like the commander is automatically wiped out as consequence of that. Again, this is going to be a bit of a bitch to work through. You can see why already, right? You can see the struggle that I'm having here. So before we go to movement, which thankfully is not as bad as the Battles of the Age of Reason stuff, although this map may make it that bad. I'm dreading it. It looks like a Barber map, and then I look at the terrain effects, and it looks as difficult to read on the terrain effects chart as his not in color. Like, he had a brown and white version of a heavily colored map to represent everything. But I actually don't, like, reading through the rules, it didn't feel like there was a lot of terrain. But then again, it didn't feel that way in Summer Storm either. Is there really a lot in here? I don't think so. I'm not seeing slopes or anything. We've got ditches. Ditches are going to be funky. I don't know. I can't tell what a ditch is. Like, I have... Wow, the map is misaligned. Oh, no, there's a little jag there, that's all. Okay, I don't know what a ditch is. Is this a ditch, or is that a river? I mean, it looks like it's a river. Or a stream or something. But then stream is here, that's a little bit more intense. So I think these thin lines that are, Rio de 7, I think that's a ditch. but I'm not sure. It looks like some kind of waterway to me, but they're all labeled as everything that looks anything like the ditch, and the ditch itself is labeled as if it's a river. Cover level 1, farmhouse 1, farmhouse 2. Why are there two different kinds of farmhouses? Why are you doing that? Why make two different images when it's the same stuff? You know, I mean, what the hell? So one of them is these little things and one of them is these, I guess. But then we have this, which looks like a little castle. Yep, chateau. Which is cover level 2. And then entrenchments. Oh, gosh. Okay, these are going to be the entrenchments then. What is the walls? Piacenza walls. Okay, these are entrenchments. These are walls, I guess, here. And they have orange around them. And you can't enter them or anything. And am I within a wall? I don't know what the hell that is. Because there doesn't seem to be any orange. Like, orange comes around here, but it doesn't seem to go beyond that. Weird. I don't know. I don't want to think. Okay. We'll get to movement in a bit. I need to get away from this for now. At some point today, I have to go out and do something. I've promised myself. I either go get milk and or I get vodka. And I'm in this situation where, like, yeah, I don't really need groceries this week. In fact, it would be a disadvantage to get them, but I do, like, there's a chance someone is gonna invite themselves over. I think that's kind of funny. The last time I can remember people just kind of dropping in to visit on short notice was when I was in Buffalo. You know, and we're talking, Jesus, more than 20 years ago now. And, you know, that's where I went to school. And even late in Buffalo, it would be pretty unlikely for someone to just drop by. It happened every now and then. But for the most part, people would drop, you know, we're talking about around the college age. But no matter what, I was in an area where, you want to go out and get some beers? Okay, we could just go down. It would be a couple blocks walk or whatever to grab stuff. Here, it's not that close. So, like, if I want to pick something up, it's got to be, you know, it's not like something I can just ask the person who just dropped by. You want to go pick some. So it is a little different. And for me, because of how I have to do it, walking, and how far away the liquor store is. Like, I used to live near a liquor store. I don't know what the hell. There are none. There are none here, and none of the supermarkets have liquor, unlike in Phoenix. So it's like, I don't know, it's about an hour walk to the liquor store, I guess. Right about that, a little less maybe. And there's not a closer one. You know, there's other ones that are that far away. Yes, indeed, I do have to go out and get both alcohol and milk on the same day. Oh well. All right, movement. And they talk here that in column would never be actually used on the battlefield. Approach games, whatever maybe, but you would never go into contact with the enemy in column. And it took a while to form into linear formation. The advantages of firepower were seen as too extreme. And I've always, that makes more sense to me, right? The whole concept of, like, the assault columns that the Napoleonic era had feels so unbelievable to me that that actually worked. All right. Combat units are grouped into formations according to their command, color on the top of the counter. So organization operates with the activation rules, and units of the same formation always move in the same segment. Yeah. So you do, yeah, whole wings though at the same time. A combat unit or a commander of an activated formation may move all or part of its movement allowance each movement segment. This is all pretty standard stuff. They spend their movement points using the terrain effects chart, which is hard to read. I forgot to point this out before, but the movement point cost, this would be much better if laid out with a chart with multiple things. The movement point costs for the different types of units, and then any special effects in another column at the very least. This is a very painful, and the typeface is hard to cope with too. Okay. Movement is carried out into one of the 6 hexes of the unit zone of control and continues until that unit wants to stop. That's an interesting way to write it. It works, but stacking has to be observed during movement. You can't just go marching through units. Commanders follow their own movement rules. All moving units are subject to the effects of terrain and zones of control. Moving from an entrenchment or redoubt to another hex of the same type pays 1 movement point. Now, that's a little funky, but what that's meant to say is if I'm moving from here to here, you'll see, let's see, that's an entrenchment. What's the difference between an entrenchment and a redoubt? Okay. I'm not sure. I really can't tell you. Looks like brown is the redoubt. These would be redoubts. And a kind of grayish color would be the entrenchment. This, I guess, is entrenchment. This is the same problem I had with the fucking barber game. I can't tell the difference between these things. So this looks grayer. These, I guess, are redoubts as well, because they're kind of brownish. I'm taking a clue. The only clue I have is this slight color difference. Otherwise, why would I be looking at one instead of the other? Well, okay, this one has no little things jutting out of it. Maybe that's what the difference is. See, they're not giving me an adequate definition. Now, I think little things jutting out, well, there are little things jutting out all over the place, and I think that's just, you know, representation of what it looks like. You know, both redoubts and entrenchments would have that kind of situation. But I am kind of bothered, like, I'm not sure that I believe. So I'm willing to buy that this is an entrenchment and there's a couple of redoubts out deep, further out from the city. That doesn't seem too unbelievable. I am having a hard time believing that the Austrians have what counts as a redoubt all the way around the city to that extent. But they are sieging it. Feels more like that would be entrenchments, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go with the color. That's the only thing that I have to indicate. Okay, where are we talking? Yeah, so the idea there is that, look, if you're within the defensive structure, you can move from one to the other as if it's clear terrain. Now, what's a little weird is that these two look like they're separated, but they wouldn't be, right? And if you had a redoubt up against an enemy redoubt, you could move between them. Luckily, that's not the case on this map, but I could see something like that happening. Okay. Like if the layers of redoubt were taken or whatever. Again, it would depend on the terrain. To cross a stream, a unit must spend additional movement points only when the hex side is actually traversed by the stream. We haven't talked much about streams. So the way rivers and streams are represented, this is a river, it's impassable. Okay. There's another river. There's the Po and the Trebbia. This is the Trebbia. There should be a bridge across one of these two. I don't know where the Po is. I can't find it. Oh, this is the Po, I'm guessing. Wow, yeah. There should be a bridge across one of these two. I guess this is the bridge here. And there's like... Okay, now here it says redoubt. And maybe that's the only place there's one. You know... What the fuck? I have no idea. Anyway. And if that's the only one, that's fucking ridiculous. Like, because that doesn't look anything like this. Okay, so streams themselves, what I wanted to talk about with them. So here's a stream. They're not drawn along the hex sides. However, there's a little blue line that is trailed across the hex sides to show which hex is on which side of the stream. And in some cases, the stream's running right down the middle of the hex, and that's kind of goofy, but they wanted to keep the map accurate rather than distorting the waterways. Okay. Artillery movement. Artillery can move, but in this case they can't bombard in the same turn. They're flipped to the fired side to indicate they've moved. This is a little weird because, well, we'll get to that later, but there's a differentiation between firing and moving. Artillery units move like other units, but at the end of their movement they must face the front towards the vertex of a hex. Nothing else has facing rules in the game, only the artillery. Engagement zone. All infantry units in good order, not disordered or routed, have an engagement zone with a range of 3 hexes. The engagement zone is not interrupted by the presence of terrain features or game units. I'm guessing game units include the military units. But it may mean game markers. I don't know. Exception. The EZ does not extend into city hexes. The EZ has influence on movement. Old hands note this was called the red zone under a previous version of the rules, I guess. Free movement. Free movement means that a unit or commander can freely maneuver outside of the 3 hex EZ. Spending movement points is required according to the terrain effects. Once an infantry unit moves into an EZ, however, it must then conform with the line restrictions. Movement is free for all in-command infantry units starting movement outside of an EZ, as long as they stay outside. An infantry unit out of an EZ can enter an EZ only if towards the nearest location that puts it in line formation. That's a really tortuous construction, but like I would much rather have heard it say only if it puts it into line formation, but this only if towards the nearest location that puts it in line formation. I think the indication of that is you can enter the EZ if you're trying to get towards line, even if you don't succeed. Also, free movement is all in-command artillery and cav. All commanders, however, see restrictions on their movement, which, like the army commander has to be in named locations. The formation commanders have to be have to be with their units. Minimum movement. Okay, regardless of terrain cost, except for impassable terrain and zone of control limitations, a unit capable of free movement can always move 1 hex. Not sure. Never mind. I don't know. Okay, well, let's talk about lines. And this is going to be a big part of the game. A formation can assume the line disposition following the prescriptions of this paragraph. Oh boy. This is feeling, again, this is language issues, right? The Azure Wish stuff had the same kind of weird formulations, and you're like, what are you telling me? Yeah. Follow the rules following. This disposition is necessary during the formation's activation when the formation is in the proximity of an enemy unit. Line is not relevant when a formation is attacked. Okay. A set of at least 2 infantry units of the same formation form a line if all the units of the line are adjacent to each other or at most within 2 hexes of another unit of the same formation. Is that my door? And it was indeed my door being knocked on. My neighbor wants to cut down one of my trees. And I'm like, geez, I didn't even know I owned that one. Okay. So where are we? We're somewhere in the line infantry movement. Okay. Let's... So 2 infantry units are in the line if they're adjacent to each other or at most 2 hexes of another unit of the same formation. If there's an intermediate hex, it can't be occupied by enemy units nor by friendly units of another formation. Now remember, that doesn't affect command, which had a similar rule, but it does affect whether or not you're in an official line formation. I don't think artillery count as part of a formation. So that would not disrupt this kind of line. At least that's my hand-wavy argument. You're allowed to stack with artillery, so things would be kind of really weird if that was the case. All the units are positioned in a hex crossed or adjacent. That is, one hex side superimposed to an imaginary line that connects the center of the hex of the first and the last unit of the line. Okay, so remember, it's 2 or more units. So if I were to look at this, assume these are all infantry, which they're not, so it's not an issue. But I could trace from here to here, and I would say this unit's outside of the line, and it breaks. There is a line here, but this unit is not in conformance, is what the situation would be under those circumstances. As an example. Now, that's nice because I'm right along the hex grain. Let's take a look here. So now I trace, say, between this unit and this unit, and you can see this unit is outside the line. You might be able to make an argument. I think this one is as well. So it's going to be really hard to make the lines work. I think it's a little too restrictive. So you can't have like a curve in the line or anything. It has to be absolute linear. And I think the hex grain is going to cause some issues with that. If it does, if it's a situation where I have no choice, I'm going to be a little bit fuzzier with this. Because I don't think it should be like, I can accept I can't have a curved line. This is the linear era. You really shouldn't. Although Banish All Their Fears would allow that. Yeah. Okay. That actually allows other things that this game would not allow. All right. A line can be composed only of infantry units and can be... Yeah, okay. What about artillery? Yeah. And can be of any length, providing all units of the line satisfy the requirements listed above. All right, line infantry movement. All in-command infantry units and in good order of an activated formation who are in an enemy EZ move in line and must deploy in this way whenever possible at the end of their movement, following the requirements of line formation. What we just dealt with. Such units during the movement segment may only stay still in their hex and or move, forming a line or maintaining the line of their formation if already in a line, or do a realignment, which we'll get to, that's up here. A line in an EZ can move in any direction, even away from the enemy units, but at the end of the movement, all units must maintain the line formation whenever possible. A unit that moves in line must try to join a line with any of the units of its formation. Voluntary movement of a unit that breaks the line is simply not permitted except for in advances. Each formation can create at most one line. During movement, the player declares into which positions he intends to create the line with the units that are already inside an EZ or will enter an EZ, thus indicating the positions that the units of the line will occupy at the end of movement. This declaration is mandatory and cannot be changed during the movement segment. These rules imply that an infantry unit can only enter an enemy EZ if you're able to move another unit of that same formation to flank the first unit, thus creating a line. Essentially, whatever's going to be within the EZ has to be able to define a single line for that formation. Misalignment. A unit that enters a hex in an EZ that is cover, ditch, or through a stream before entering the hex or passing through the hex side must do a TDR, the training die roll. Applying the modifiers for the train, which is on the TEC. So let's take a look. Let's say across a stream, movement +1 movement point, TDR with +2 DRM, artillery only via bridge, melee combat only through allowed, die roll modifier -1, no cavalry charge through, but there's a +2 DRM for crossing a stream. Okay. Applying the modifiers. Exception, no TDR is done if the unit enters the hex via road. If the TDR is passed, the unit moves and the line remains orderly. On the other hand, if it fails, the unit stops and its line may present a hole. Now you've already declared where your line is going to be. May present a hole. This will affect the firing capacity of the formation at that point. A little bit. If a unit is moving as part of a line that fails a TDR due to terrain, the line could become misaligned if other units who had no need of TDR had moved first. I think it's kind of weird the way that's worded. It's like, yeah, so I don't think you can move other units to break the line after you fail your TDR. It's best to see if the units have passed the TDR before moving other units that are part of the line. Since leaders capable of assisting complex movements move at the end of the activation, the player will have to predict which units will have to have complex terrain the next round and support them with a leader. The leader is able to say, hey, cut through those bushes, wade through that water. Realignment. Realignment is intended as movement of an infantry unit moving into a hex with an enemy EZ to enter or re-enter a line. To perform a realignment, an in-command unit may only move towards the closest position that brings it back into the line of its formation. As an alternative, if already in an EZ, it can remain stationary. You can enter a zone of control, you can fire, possibly with a penalty for being non-side-by-side, but you cannot perform melee combat until you're back in line. Out of command units. A combat unit that's out of command or without its formation commander can move in the activation of its formation to try to re-enter the command range of its formation commander, or his superior if the FC is deceased. That's interesting. So remember, the way it's worded is that the formation commander extends the command. Well, let's take a look, because I don't remember anything about the wing commander, for example. A wing commander commands every formation commander of his own wing that is within command range. It doesn't say anything about tracing to units, but it seems to me, and there's another deceased thing to the commander-in-chief, it seems to me that units can remain in command by this, even if not specified elsewhere, by being within the command range of their wing commander. But I think, since there's nothing about extending it down the length of the line, that formation would have to be entirely within the wing commander's command radius. I gotta swap batteries. Okay. Where were we? We were on the out of command. Okay, or if, so we were saying you can try to re-enter the command range of the formation commander, or if already in command range, to move away from the nearest enemy unit. An out-of-command infantry unit in an EZ moves primarily to perform a realignment if its formation is in line. Otherwise, it can only move as in the previous cases. I don't know. An out-of-command unit may never enter an enemy zone of control. It cannot initiate combats. It can perform defensive fire if targeted by enemy fire, with an exception for light infantry. Now remember, light infantry are going to be invisible. They've got this little L here. Which is, honestly, that's the only unit I've seen that I've seen one on, and it is... It looks like just a... there's another one. It looks like it's just a little mess on the counter. God. I wish there were Ds on the Dragoon that were as good. Yeah, there's a real problem with the information presentation in this game in a lot of ways. From the writing of the rules to the counter design, etc. Okay. Cav refusal. Cavalry always refuses to remain in an enemy infantry zone of control. The moment an infantry unit moves into the zone of control of an enemy cav unit, the latter must retreat 1 hex without suffering a reaction fire. The infantry may continue moving if it has residual movement points, and the cav will retreat even if melees and charges had already been declared against it. Something to consider if the line's movement would frustrate your plans. I don't know what they mean by that, this note. The line can chase your cav away. I don't know why the line's movement, the line itself isn't getting disrupted by it. Any commander present in a hex also retreats together with the cavalry. 2 cav units may retreat in different directions, and the commander can choose which one. Here's the training die roll reproduced there. Some game operations require the training die roll. To do so, you roll a d10, and you have to get equal to or lower than the value indicated. Yeah. So my neighbor, not just... he came over to talk about the tree, but he's also got issues. His wife is in the hospital, and just it's kind of an emotional thing in many ways. And my own emotions triggered as well. All right, I'm gonna break for a while. I gotta go down and get me some vodka, probably some vermouth too, because it's kind of running low, and like I said, I also want to stop at the supermarket on the way home. So apparently my plans take another shift. So along with what I thought was going to drive me to have to go shopping, immediately afterwards I was reminded of a celebration of life that I have to go to, or that I agreed to go to if I was reminded of it. And now I'm like, I don't know, man. Fuck. But it's someone I barely know. I mean, I barely know anyone, right? So that kind of disrupts my whole situation. I don't really want to go shopping the same day that I have to go out and do something else. You could conceivably go, and I don't need to get both alcohol and milk at the same time, which was a complexity I wasn't really looking forward to. I was like, yeah, I can just get the milk. If I'm not going to be seeing anybody, you know, if I'm not going to be boozing anyone up this week, I got enough for me. But yeah, I think I'm just going to skip any of that and get on with the rolls, man. But I do need to switch pipes. And yeah. Yeah, this is another, you know, someone, again, that I don't really know very well, but used to go to the bar a lot. you know, was a friendly face that I was used to seeing and everything. And feels a little funny, but I kind of agreed to go on Friday if somebody reminded me. And unfortunately, the person I was supposed to hang out with reminded me. Oh, I don't know. Fucked up, but I feel like the social interaction's a good idea for me, if nothing else. Yeah. All right, stacking. Stacking's weird in this game. So they go into some discussion about a first line, second line of units, the interval between them, and the fact that units from the rear, units from the back of the formation would fill in gaps that were created through firing. Okay. An infantry unit, including dismounted dragoons, may stack with an artillery unit. And then we go to something that has nothing to do with what's being discussed here. 2 cav units may stack together. No other combinations are allowed. These limits are applied at all times in the game, except during a retreat. You can momentarily exceed stacking limits to retreat to a non-overstacked hex. Commanders do not count towards stacking, and any number of them in any type can be in the same hex. Regimental or multi-battalion counters, a hypothetical deep deployment with reserve battalions behind is assumed. Superior firepower is justified by the swift replacement of casualties suffered in the shooting. Larger units are also more difficult to retreat or rout. But again, that's not part of this little slice of the rule, to tell you the truth. Zones of control. Units excluding commanders and artillery have a zone of control in the 6 adjacent hexes, affecting the enemy units positioned in those hexes. This is not exerted by a unit in woods or cover of level 1 or 2. However, the exception to that, the zone of control in an entrenchment or redoubt extends into adjacent entrenchment and or redoubt hexes. I don't know if there's a case where like an entrenchment and a redoubt are next to each other. Again, I'm not absolutely certain what is what on the map. We're in this wonderful case of the hand-drawn maps that aren't necessarily very clear. Zone of control. A unit must stop moving upon entering an enemy zone of control, but it's not required to attack. Before entering an infantry's enemy zone of control, a cav unit has to make a training roll with a +2 modifier. That's not good. If the TDR is successful, it can enter the hex. Otherwise, the cavalry unit remains in place in disorder and stops moving. I'm assuming that means it gets disordered by it if it isn't. A unit freely retreats or advances into or through an enemy zone of control, suffers no enemy reaction. Okay. Sort of a null rule there, but useful. An out-of-command unit can never enter an enemy zone of control. Units cannot move directly from one EZOC to another. Voluntarily leaving one does not cost anything in movement points, but does cause reaction fire, which will be covered right here. Die modifier -3. By all enemy infantry units exerting the zone of control. Units exiting the enemy zone of control do not return fire. Performing a training roll in an enemy zone of control is a +1 modifier. They do not block the chain of command. A commander or an artillery unit cannot voluntarily enter a hex in an enemy zone of control unless the hex is already occupied by a friendly unit. Leaving an enemy zone of control causes reaction fire by any enemy unit exerting a zone of control with a die roll modifier of -3 in addition to any other standard fire modifier. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. That is not good for the firing unit. Mild, normal, extended, and intense fire. But they do have some reminders of what that means. Okay, I'm going to relight my pipe, and then we'll get to the bombardment rolls. They talk a little bit about the cannonballs here and the range that they can hit, and the use of grape shot, and then also Austrian howitzers. Battalion light artillery is incorporated into the infantry strength. The Franco-Spanish artillery in Piacenza on the walls was of no effect and is not represented. The only artillery, it turns out, is Austrian. Or, is it all Austrian? I know the, Piedmontese? Or is it, sorry, yeah, I think it's the Piedmontese are supporting the Austrians. But they decided not to make it to the battle or something. Okay. In-command artillery units of an activated formation. Artillery appear to be part of a wing and nothing else. They don't have... do they? Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, see, I mean, like, this is spaced over here with Piccolomini. I don't think, and this is over here, but this is a different wing. God, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you get aligned with the formation with artillery. Can bombard in the dedicated segment of the wing activation. If they have not fired, they can do defensive fire if subjected to enemy infantry fire only against the enemy infantry itself. In this case, they're flipped to the fire side, meaning that they've already fired. The maximum range of the artillery is 3 hexes. An artillery unit fires, and that's an effective range judgment rather than how far they could actually fire. An artillery unit fires in the direction of its frontal hexes in a cone of fire, pretty standard. G is read as M in the rules, is for the grape shot range. The other 2 are regular ranges. To fire, you roll a die on the bombardment and fire modifiers table. Okay, so we'd roll on the bombardment table. And we have to look through all of this. See terrain effects chart. These are melee ones. I think, let me go over here. Notes for fire. If the firing unit has, yeah, this is for this. Column modifier, bombardment or fire against staggered in depth. You're going to get, if an infantry unit is big enough, you get a shift against you. And the argument for that is the replacement units coming up, as opposed to the depth actually causing, especially with artillery, more fire to go through. SP modifiers, the commander can give a fire bonus if he's there. Then there's the bombardment and fire modifiers table. I'm looking for this. That's what I was looking for. Oh, here it is. Okay. And then a set of results. And yeah, the range of the artillery gives a modifier, the cover level, smoke if it's present, reaction fire, which is when the withdrawal happens, that's a big penalty. Unaligned fire is when infantry is not adjacent to another unit, and flank fire is a bonus if you have other units supporting your attack, essentially, and we'll see how that works in a bit. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The number of strength points of the firing artillery unit, the chosen column is shifted 1 to the left, but not beyond the first column if the hex contains more than a certain number of strength points. At the intersection, this is such a weird way to write it, but again, at the intersection, the bombardment table indicates the effect of the bombardment. By that, they mean you're cross-referencing the roll to the column. It's not possible to combine the bombardment of more than one unit, but I think you can fire multiple artillery. They just each get their own die roll. Line of sight. When a distance of 2 or more hexes, an artillery must have an unblocked line of sight. It's a straight line drawn through the center It's blocked by any intermediate hex with friendly or enemy units, woods, or cover terrain. But you can always fire directly into and from a blocking hex. A line of sight can only be traced along a hex side when one of the two hexes sharing the hex side is non-blocking. There's basically no elevation levels on this map, so yeah, line of sight's pretty simple. Whatever it is, pretty much blocks. Now this may be hard because you got to pay attention to what cover might be. So what is cover level 1? Farmhouse, right? So this little building, this wouldn't normally block a line of sight. It's going to block line of sight in this. Well, we have two different types of farmhouse. I don't know why we have two types of farmhouse, but this kind also, which looks bigger and might actually block it. And then we have this little triangle thing, which is one of these, but I think this is just like another little house, right? Oh no, that's like a farmstead, which will not block line of sight. So the farmhouse is a bigger thing. The little farmsteads do not block line of sight because they're not cover. They're clear terrain. Okay. It's just somebody in this hut. Fire modifiers are listed in the table. Yeah, we looked. Subterranean and the smoke marker give an advantage to units occupying them during bombardment or fire. All modifiers are cumulative, but down to a minimum negative of 4. Smoke. Smoke gives a modifier to the fire and bombardment die roll to those units that fire inside or from inside or through a hex with the marker and the 6 adjacent hexes. The modifier is -2 in the hex with the smoke marker, -1 for each hex adjacent. The smoke marker is placed on the hex of the firing unit that fires in 2 cases. After you make an artillery barrage, smoke is placed. After. In the event of the appearance of the marker of feu de billable, fire at will or fire at random, you'll get smoke. And the effects of 2 different smoke markers add up, but never under the minimum of -2. Weird. Yeah. When you combine math and English, things get kind of weird anyway, but yeah, this is not a normal way to try to express that. All smoke markers are removed at the end of the turn, but not the feu de billable markers. Okay, so the feu de billable is not smoke in and of itself. You have to put smoke in addition. A TDR in a box with a smoke marker causes a +2 modifier, +1 if adjacent. And we have, I hope that's in here. Yeah. Okay, so what they're trying to say with the smoke marker is if you trace directly through the smoke marker, you get a -2 penalty. If you trace through 2 hexes adjacent to smoke markers, or a single smoke marker, you get a -2. If you trace through just 1, you get a -1. Okay. Rate of fire. Artillery can fire twice in any given turn. The first volley immediately precedes the second one. After you fire the first one, you get a smoke marker, which means your fire is going to be less effective because you've got smoke in your hex. That's -2. The second volley suffers the smoke penalty. After firing the second time, the artillery is flipped to its fired side. But you don't have to do that second volley. The artillery can be turned immediately after the first volley. If you do fire, however, if you do fire twice, you have to check for a battery failure. On a 0 or 1, the counter will remain on its fired side for the rest of the day and will no longer be able to shoot. This is icky. There's nothing to indicate that the unit is fired and cannot unfire. It cannot flip back over. I guess you could rotate the counter or something like that. You could put some kind of stupid marker to indicate that it's disabled or whatever. But basically, I think it's allowed to move, but I'm not sure because being on the fired side normally would say you can't move. Anyway, what's up there? Bombardment effects. The result of the bombardment table, and I don't know what that's intended to indicate. I don't know if that's a lack of ammo, or probably more likely that you've actually damaged the guns. But the guns are a whole battery, so they shouldn't all fail at once. The results of the bombardment table are an E, one unit is eliminated. A 1R, one unit loses a step, flips the counter, and routes. So some of the counters are going to be two-step units, and some are one-step units. Here should be a one-step unit. The one-step units don't have any value on the other side. They take a step loss, and they're dead. Which means if you take an E, you might want to aim for one of your one-step units. RR, one unit routes, and there's a ricochet effect, i.e. bouncing cannonballs. A 1 is a unit loses a step, and a D, 1, 2, or 3 is a unit is disordered and retreats that many hexes. A D alone, a unit is disordered and remains in position, and an NE is no effect. Now let's look at the combat table. Okay. It's pretty hard to get an E on the bombardment table. All right. How do you apply the effects? The owning player chooses which units in the stack subject to the fire take the effects of the shot. The artillery unit cannot suffer effects if an infantry unit is present in the same hex, i.e. there's no counter battery fire in this game. If instead it's alone in the hex, a result of elimination, step loss, or retreat eliminates the unit. Disorder will have no effect on artillery. Ricochets. We got to swap batteries pretty soon. The player owning a unit that gets hit by the RR result, route and ricochet. It routes the affected unit, and you choose a unit present in the same hex, or as a second priority, immediately behind the direction of the volley, and execute a bombardment die roll, column 1 through 2, strength points. Applying the standard modifiers, ricochets further results are ignored, which I think means if you get an RR again, you don't get the ricochet portion of it. In the case of grape shot, the RR result becomes a normal route result because there's no cannonball bouncing. Changing ranks. Firefight involves a line that advances, stops, fires, proceeds again. The gaps left by the enemy fire were immediately replaced. The first time in a game turn that an infantry unit of at least 2 SP in good order, not disordered or routed, takes a D or DRR result, i.e. that not actual casualties, DR number, sorry. As a result of bombardment or fire, roll a die. If the result is a number between 0 or 3, modified by stacked or adjacent leaders, then the unit returns to good order by changing ranks. Subtract 1 to the die result if the unit is or is adjacent to a grenadiers unit in good order. If it fails, because the grenadiers will enforce like the replacement. They'll be like, "You guys move!" You're like, "Yes, sir." Because they're big. A unit may attempt changing of rank several times per turn, but it can only do it successfully once in a turn. Now it says the first time that it happens. Ignore that. I think that's wrong. It can only successfully do it once per turn. And when it is successfully done, they'll get the changing marker, which is here, which indicates that you're not able to avoid the effect again. And that'll be removed at the end of the turn. Effects on units staggered in depth. Although the biggest units may seem more crowded and therefore more easily targeted by guns, the front unit was still a battalion. The rest were staggered behind in reserve lines. The larger the units, the easier it was to replace lines that were momentarily in crisis. If the target of a bombardment or fire is an infantry unit greater than 2 strength points, the column of the bombarding or firing force shifts 1 to the left. You have less effect. You actually cause less casualties in essence because of this, but casualties are somewhat abstracted, so I guess. I guess. All right. And then they give an example. I'm going to have to swap batteries, and I think I'll take a little bit of a break. kind of hungry. We're at the Staples. That means we're at about the halfway point. I mean, you know, there's light stuff in the back, historical, etc. So we're actually quite a bit further. However, there's light stuff at the front too, so. All right. There's two forms of combat fire in melee. Infantry or dismounted cavalry may conduct fire combat on adjacent units. Infantry and cavalry can sometimes declare melee against adjacent units. Only cavalry can carry out charges. Artillery don't fight, but they bombard and execute defensive fire if subject to fire, and also, I believe, melee. Attack's not mandatory. The activated player is the attacker, the opponent's the defender. We get some historical accuracy rates written out. This is all very interesting stuff. And I really appreciate it being in here. I don't know how much it's going to distract me. The fact that it's just historical notes is maybe helpful because my brain is trained for this kind of rule set in the sense of ignore the stuff in the boxes and the colors. So it actually, where it'll help is it gives me a pictorial, like I remember where something is on the page and I'll remember the color splotches near it, but I will not know anything that's within them when I'm looking for a rule or something. In-command infantry or dismounted cavalry that are of an activated formation can conduct fire combat on adjacent enemy units. Out-of-command units cannot fire during an activation, but if they're attacked, they get to fire back. Firefights is a double volley of reciprocal fire. Reciprocal meaning that the units of the active formations after moving can fire using up to 2 volleys on the same target. No, that's not what it means. What it means is this next thing. After each volley, enemy units subject to fire fire in turn, defensive fire, using as targets only the enemy units which fired offensively. However, offensive and defensive fire, now what it doesn't spell out is I don't think you have to fire at the specific unit that fired at you. However, offensive and defensive fire of each volley is considered simultaneous. All friendly and enemy units suffer casualties after having both fired in each volley. But the 2 volleys are not simultaneous. The second volley is conditional upon the success of a training die roll for each unit that intends to fire. If it fails, place the feu de billable marker on the unit. It will not fire and the marker is removed. This TDR is performed both for the attacker and the defender before they make reciprocal fire of the second volley. And remember, it's optional for both players. So, in each volley, each unit of the active formation can fire, and each enemy unit can be subjected to fire any number of times in the same fire phase. This is poorly worded. Each unit can fire once in each volley. Not any number of times, which is the concluding clause there. If a unit is subject to fire from more than one enemy unit, the latter do not combine fire. They fire one at a time, and the unit subject to fire will be able to exert defensive fire against only one of the enemy units that fired at it. Yeah, okay, so I was wrong. You can't fire at any enemy units that fired during that phase. It's only ones that fired at you. If a unit suffers fire from multiple enemy units, all step losses add up, but only the highest level of disorder is suffered. D1, D2, D3 route. At the beginning of each volley, the attacking player first defines all the targets of fire, then the defender indicates all targets of defensive fire, then they execute the rolls, and they say first attacker, then defender, but honestly, the execution is simultaneous in effect. A unit that fires cannot initiate melee in the same activation. All right, the first volley. You roll a d10 on the bombardment using the bombardment and fire modifiers table, but I think you also have to pay attention to stuff here. There's like column shifts and stuff like that. So it's not that. Well, this is the melee. This is the bombardment and fire, but it has column shifts in it as well. So yeah, okay. which may indicate die roll modifiers. Then the fire table is consulted, cross-referencing the number of strength points of the firing unit, which is going to be normal is 1 strength point, extended 2, 3, whatever. But hold on. The columns chosen on the fire table is shifted 1 to the left, but not beyond the first column if the hex contains more than a certain number of a certain number of strength points, which is this. Bombardment or fire versus staggered in death. 2 plus strength points minus 1 is the number of columns shifted. No, that is not a formula. 2 or more strength points gives you a 1 column shift. Gotcha. Okay. At the intersection, the fire table contains the results. Yeah. And some, very few units are going to have 3 or 4 strength points, but there are some. You got here a 3. Here's some units with 4. Just big firepower capability. Okay. Now, after you do that, you can go to the second volley. And for each unit of the active formation still adjacent to the enemy after the first volley, that player wishes to fire a second time, including therefore units performing defensive fire, a TDR must be performed. If the die roll is successful, if impacted by the commander, the unit fires with the same procedures as the first volley. If the TDR fails, a feu de billabong marker is placed on the unit. This will also imply a smoke marker. Now this is what's weird. Before, it didn't say it that way. What it said is, in the event of the appearance of the marker of feu de billabong, the smoke marker is placed on the hex of the firing unit in 2 cases. First, artillery barrage, in the event of the appearance of a marker of a feu de billabong. Now, the feu de billabong means the unit starts firing at will and continues until order is restored to the troops. So, I'm left with a contradiction between the two. Here, it says a smoke marker is placed, essentially, right? When the feu de billabong is played. Here, it says it's implied. Now, saying it's implied implies that it's not necessary to put the smoke marker there. But I don't think that's the case, because the smoke marker does clear, but the feu de billabong does not. I think that's how I'm going to play it, is the first turn where you get the feu de billabong, you end up, and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it right, you end up with a smoke marker, and that smoke marker dissipates, but the feu de billabong stays in place with its specific effects. The inactive player in turn can trigger the second volley using the same way as the active player. I think only if they're fired upon like before, but I'm not sure. Because here it says both players must announce their intention to fire a second volley. So I think if you're attempted to be fired on a second time, you can attempt. But I'm not sure. Like, again, I'm facing a contradiction here. Is this bad? I don't know. At each subsequent activation of the formation before the movement segment, the player can do a TDR to try to remove the feu de billabong markers on the activated units. Here we refer to the loss of fire capacity of a unit without the direction of the formation commander, attributing the command bonus to the fire ability, but especially to the fire discipline, allows players to move commanders to intensify fire in sectors that prove critical during the battle. So, when you look at the training die rolls, if you have normal infantry, well, you're looking at a 20% chance, same chance as breaking the artillery, of failing to fire. But if you have a commander who gives you let's look. So the commander gives a fire bonus, and we'll get to that in a moment. that is not this. You have a commander who I believe gives you the sergeant bonus, perhaps, which will be able to improve your chances of firing that second round. But there's an additional advantage, which is the commander also can improve your firepower. Okay. As long as a unit carries the feu de billable, it cannot move, fire, or melee, but it will defend normally if attacked in melee. Basically, its fire becomes ineffective. It's not allowed to move. It's just standing there firing randomly, taking cover, all kind of shit like that. It's no longer an effective unit in a lot of ways. All right, some other modifiers. Non-side-by-side. During an offensive, defensive, or reaction fire, the line formation is not considered. A firing unit fires at full strength as long as it's adjacent to one unit of its own formation and is also adjacent to the enemy unit being fired at. Otherwise, there's a -2 to the fire table roll, which is pretty devastating. The formation commander adjacent to or stacked with a firing unit of his formation, or the wing commander. Now I got a problem with this because the wing commander has no value, okay? Or wait, that's the sergeant's number? Hold on. Let's look at what our numbers are. This is, see, it's so annoying because they don't actually have the numbers on the formation commander. So the fire bonus, yeah, the fire bonus is the red number. Good, so they both have it. So like Nadsaki would add 2, but Lucchese would add 2. So you would end up using the wing commander instead of the formation commander. I don't know if there's any cases where the wing commander sucks. This is the overall army commander. He doesn't have that value. I could see where it's possible, but I don't think it's the case. I'm looking at this the Austrians, and I'm not seeing any cases of it. All right. The formation commander adjacent to or stacked with a firing unit adds his fire bonus to the strength of the firing unit. So a 1 strength point unit with a commander with a fire bonus of 2 becomes a 3 and uses the extended fire table. Okay, so this is a big deal. Where your commander is going to improve your fire, but it also improves your chances of recovering if it's your formation commander who has sergeants, but not your wing commander. But your flag has sergeants, even though the staff doesn't. In case you get converted into a flag and a staff. Oh, I'm not happy about that, but I'm sure there's a reason. Anyway, fire effects, eliminator routed, lose a step. It's the same stuff as off the artillery. Changing ranks, same as the artillery bombardment. What was changing ranks? That is where you put the changing marker down to avoid a disrupted result. Staggered in depth, same as the artillery bombardment. What did staggered in depth do? It reduces the column. This is all in the fire bombardment table information. There's the modifier table. There's other modifiers as well that aren't on the table. But they're on the card, so it's useful, but it's going to be kind of complex to deal with. I've had a problem dealing with lots of modifiers. In Summer Storm, unfortunately, that was what Berg used to call a reductium ad absurdum combat model. To me, it's odds, etc., are treated as modifiers. Everything turns into a modifier on that. But anyway. Flanking fire. Okay, you get a +2 flank bonus if one other unit of the same formation is adjacent to the unit receiving fire, but not adjacent to the firing unit. Okay, and what would that mean? Well, that means that there's at least a hex side between you and the unit giving you the bonus. And they could all be full. So 2 solid lines firing at each other can give flanking fire bonuses. Right? Let me show you. All right. So let's say these are all just one formations, and they're all infantry and whatever. So this guy, let's say this guy fires at this. Well, this unit's adjacent, so it's not going to help. So a straight line is not going to do it on the hex grain. It may only happen at a weird angle. Try to see. That's on a hex grain. Everything's on a hex grain, damn it. All right, let's try this. Let's see what we have here. Did I only have 3 of these? No, there's a 4th one. Okay. All right, so this is a little bit, I think this will work. So let's say this guy fires at this unit. This unit would give him flanking bonus. Now you can kind of say, well, there's this weird deformation. Yeah, but if we talk about linear, this whole force is in a line, and this whole force up to here is in a line. You can start going up there and you're not. So it's the deformation of the hex grid that's actually causing this issue, where flanking fire can occur where it might not otherwise. And it'll feel kind of weird when you see 2 solid lines hit each other and they get all kind of flanking fire on each other. But it won't happen if they're on the hex grain. So an important tactical consideration is if you want to hurt the enemy more, make sure you deploy not on the, and yourself, make sure you deploy not along the hex grains. This is something that linear combat carefully had to study, was what the hex grains were like on any given battlefield. All right, just being silly. That'll get us to melee combat. I need to swap batteries, maybe light a pipe. A little historical discussion here about the use of melee. Less common than you're going to see in other eras, but still plausible. And basically, what they're saying is you wouldn't see a bayonet charge in the open. They would happen in skirmishers or between houses or entrenchments in types of terrain that's closer and rougher, giving you protection from that massive wall of fire. This is an era of firepower dominating the field. Somehow or another, using essentially the same technology. Trying to think about the socket bayonet. I don't know if it exists here. It looks like it does because like some of the infantry are attached with it, but I'd have to look that up. Essentially you're looking at, I believe, more or less the same technology, but something has changed by the Napoleonic period, which makes it plausible for units to make a mass charge. And some of it, I think, is the relaxation of the linear formation. The linear formation is too fragile to sustain this kind of attack, I think. All right. Melee is a combat that can be performed by infantry or cavalry against an adjacent enemy unit. Infantry cannot melee against cavalry. During the movement segment, by expending the required number of movement points, an in-command unit of an activated formation may declare a melee against an adjacent enemy unit. Out-of-command units cannot melee during an activation. If attacked, they respond to melee or fire normally. Right, they can return fire. I was just trying to think about that because, yes, but they can return fire. They're still out of command, though. The movement point cost to declare a melee is equal to the number of movement points needed to enter the enemy hex, ignoring enemy zones of control. Impassable hex sides impede melee combat. I would think they prohibit it. Free movement is allowed. I don't know if I believe you. Free movement is 5.3. Free movement is when you're not in an engagement zone. Okay. I guess it's allowed if you are a calf unit. That's about it. Okay. I mean, that's the only way I can see it. That's the only effect I can see of saying this, and I'm not sure you really would have to say it. Place a melee marker. And this may be... So let's see. Enemy zone of controls are not considered in this count. Impassable hex sides impede. There's another comment. Yeah, I don't know what this is meant to even express. Forget it. Place a melee marker on the unit that intends to attack. And we have these charge melee options, which give you a little pointy arrow to put towards it. Pointing in the direction of the attacked unit. If the unit does not have enough movement points, melee is not possible. Placement of a melee marker occurs during the movement segment of the wing activation, while the melee itself is done during combat. An enemy hex may be subject to only one infantry or one cavalry melee combat per wing activation. Each combat, melee or charge, fire is combat too, always involves only one counter. I mean, it is under the game. Bombardment's not, but where were we? Each combat always involves only one counter on each side, and this affects the combat only applying to the combating units. Exception: a unit stacked with a unit that retreats or is eliminated as a result of melee or charge must retreat from the hex, and an artillery unit in that hex would be eliminated. Command requirements. Melee can only be initiated if the attacking unit moves on direct command, i.e., okay, we're going to define it here, its formation commander's counter is stacked or adjacent at the start of their movement. There is no such requirement for cav. This is going to be hard to remember. Infantry melee. An infantry unit of an activated formation can declare a melee against an adjacent enemy infantry and or artillery unit only if the latter occupies a hex with cover, level 1 or 2, or the city of Piacenza. Piacenza. I always want to put an N in there, like another N. An artillery unit alone, however, can always be attacked in melee, and it's absolutely destroyed. Infantry cannot conduct melee against cav. Said that already. An infantry unit that has fired cannot melee in the same turn. An attacked infantry unit in melee fires before resolving the melee. Melee combat against an infantry unit or an infantry unit with artillery takes place as follows. First, the defender executes a single volley on the fire table for each defending unit. Unless they're, the fire at will shit, I guess. Then the attacker, if he's still in the hex, combats using the melee table. Artillery SPs are not computed in melee resolution. If the infantry unit is forced to retreat, any artillery there is eliminated. An artillery unit alone in a hex attack is eliminated after it does defensive fire, assuming the infantry is still there. And it may not be able to do defensive fire because it may have fired already. At least that's how I take it. Melee resolution. The ratio between the attacker's strength and defender's strength is calculated and rounded down to the closest odds ratio on the melee table. Pretty standard looking there. Modified for terrain effects. The modified result is cross-referenced with the column on the correct odds ratio to obtain the result. Attack on redoubts and field fortifications. Infantry melee versus units in cover 2 units has a -2 die roll for the attackers. It's not on here. It's here. Here it just says melee is allowed against cover level 1 with no penalty. So it may be the best way of dealing with units in cover. Light infantry. All light infantry, indicated with an L on the counter. Yeah, okay. My one light infantry unit, well, 2, they're both the same command, that I've been able to discover. Maybe I'll find more as I go. They have a modifier of -1 in all TDR. Is this only during melee, or is this all? This is in the melee section. Why are you telling me this? Well, it looks like it's always there. It's on the chart. Okay, they ignore disorder results for melee table, but not retreat when attacking or defending. That is not specified here, so it's something to keep track of. If out of command, they can fire but not melee. Again, something new, I guess. They're allowed to offensive fire out of command, I guess. Effects of melee. This is going to be like a lot of games where you have an attacker and defender affected a certain way, and then it's either elimination, step losses, and or disorders. If you take a step loss, you're disordered. A disordered infantry unit that's already disordered may rout. Contrary to the panic triggered by breaking ranks due to lethal fire, after a melee retreats were not overly long. Exhaustion prevailed. Makes sense. After a melee or charge, if the unit has to retreat, it will do so by moving away from the attacking enemy unit by the required number of hexes, respecting the priorities. Into an adjacent hex not in violation of stacking and not in an enemy zone of control. It's basically a series of things, eventually going towards a friendly area of the map. Retreat after combat, and for cavalry refusal does not cause a reaction fire. When overlapping friendly units, i.e. stepping on them, the retreating unit passes over and crosses any friendly units without consequence for both units. Translocation. We have all these term definitions in bold and whatnot, and they're not used anywhere else. Some of them are, but a lot of them are not. Until, when possible, it finds a free hex in which to retreat without incurring a stack penalty. It's not possible to retreat over enemy units or into or through forbidden terrain, such as the Po River or the walls of Piacenza or off the map. In these cases, the unit will be eliminated and or surrender. Two units in the same hex that are forced to retreat may do so in different directions. The first step loss is assigned by turning the unit on its back, if the unit has 2 steps. If the unit's already on its back or a single step and it takes a loss, it's removed from the game. At the end of melee, the winning attacking unit must enter the attacked hex. The defender cannot advance. We are almost done. All right. I want to pause, though. I'm just thinking, do I want to do the cav yet? All right. Cav can fight on horseback, melee, or charge, or dismounted, that is on foot. Dragoons only can do this. Okay, thanks. Dismounted cav fights under infantry rules, either by fire or melee. And then they talk about the size of the cav units, which is smaller. Strength points of cav are basically squadrons rather than full battalions. They talk about cav tends to attack defenseless infantry in the flanks or when the infantry is small and messy, even if they manage to form a rough square. There's no training in making squares of battalions and companies. This is weird to me because there certainly were squares in an earlier period, but they seem to have, in fact, I think we even had them in the age of Marlborough. In any case, cavalry in charge had a terrible psychological effect, and it took well-trained troops to withdraw. So we're at a more restrictive linear combat than what you see in, say, Banish All Their Fears. And I'm willing to accept that. Like, I think that's actually accurate. I seem to recall squares went out of favor. The idea was that the firepower was so great, and the cav sort of becomes more of a weaker arm at this point. because of that massed firepower effectiveness. Cav charges were not such a frequent occurrence. First training had not yet reached the perfection of the Napoleonic imperial period. In the armies, there was still a lot of bravado and improvisation. Cav avoided attacking infantry units because beyond the squares, the bayonets had the same function as pikes. All of this makes the same sense. But the main thing is, it's almost as though the Cav charge has been so degraded by the linear formation that the square is no longer needed, that these solid lines are so well formed and so solid that you don't end up doing it. But on the other hand, they say something. In any case, cavalry and charge had a terrible psychological effect, and it took a well-trained troop to withstand the shock, which doesn't sound like the Cav would be useless, right? The historical is kind of hedging both sides, and I'm having a hard time believing that squares would be useless. In Piacenza, linear cavalry formations and massive charges are not possible. Cav can move as a stack or as a single unit. It can fight against enemy units performing melee against cavalry, infantry, and or artillery units, or charge against enemy cavalry. Cav combat always resolves as a melee between the attacking Cav and one of the enemy units on the defending hex. Cav does not need an adjacent field commander to melee or charge. The attacking Cav immediately becomes disordered after the attack. An already disordered cavalry unit may rout. Cav does not pursue. Cav melee follows the prescriptions at paragraph 7.1. What? What are you referring me to here? Having to make the TDR, I guess. And 9.21, which is basic melee effects. It is resolved between adjacent hexes and with the same procedure. Okay. A Cav unit of an activated formation may declare a melee against an adjacent enemy unit only if this unit is in clear or ditch. What the fuck is ditch? Ditch is one of the types of, ditch is the little rivers. They're not even streams, but presumably they're wet because they look blue and they say river on them. Okay. Artillery units attacked by Cav are wiped out and eliminated without recourse to the table unless they're together with infantry. In this case, the infantry defends alone and the artillery follows the fate. If the defending unit is an infantry unit out of command, disordered, or routed, it does not defend from the cavalry. In this case, the infantry just retreats 2 hexes. These Cav are not charging very hard. In the opposite direction to the direction of the attack, where possible, in any case away from the attacking cavalry. This is almost like... So Cav was doing effective charges back in the Marlborough period and in, the Great Northern War. At this point, it feels like they've gotten the same kind of reluctance to fight that they had prior to Gustavus Adolphus, where they're just, they're facing these big pike units and the firepower and everything, and they just say, "Fuck it, we're not gonna charge the way we used to." Obviously, things like the Poles would, but with their lancers and whatnot, and probably Hungarians as well. But those weren't heavy Cav doing that for the most part. So anyway, in this case, the infantry retreats, the retreat is performed immediately upon placing the melee marker. Otherwise, the defending infantry must perform a TDR in order to stand. If the TDR is successful, the infantry unit follows the procedure, fires a defensive volley before the impact, with the modifiers for defensive fire. There were modifiers for defensive fire? I got reaction fire. Okay, let's see see paragraph 9.13, because I don't remember this. Modifiers for non-side-by-side. Okay. There's no modifier for defensive fire. It's modifiers that you would get under defensive fire. Fair enough. Fire results apply. Any result other than no effect or disorder aborts the procedure. Otherwise, then the melee is executed. If the TDR is unsuccessful, the cav melee takes place with a one-column advantage for the attacker. And remember, this is going to be a strength point comparison over here with modifiers. One column to the right of yeah, that's that. One column to the right cav charge, that wouldn't happen. One column to the right flank. Yeah, we're going to hit the flank very shortly, right? We got a flank melee. Oh, yeah, we got flank fire. We have flank and melee? I don't think so. And this is weird because flank cavalry melee, 10.4. Oh, okay. Cav charge is handled here, then flank melee and charge is given a modifier here. Okay. Cav charge begins at a walking pace, then breaking into a trot, accelerating eventually to a gallop for about 130 meters, after which the horses would throw themselves against enemy horses. Note, cav charges are only done against other cav in this. Again, the cav is being used very, very differently than it was just, 30 years before, right? It's more reminiscent of aerial. Oh, and then if two opposing squadrons faced each other, the impetus was such the two units would pass by each other, emerging from the back of the enemy formation. And he reckons that it's similar to aerial combat in World War I. Orientation was soon lost. Friends and opponents suddenly appeared left or right. And then he goes into talking about his own crazy horse experience. Okay. A charge always takes place only between opposing cav. Cav units of an activated formation may declare a charge against an enemy cav unit only if the hex occupied by the enemy cav unit. What? May declare a charge only if the hex. Oh, this is two things that are going to be followed by are clear terrain. The hex occupied by the enemy cav unit is in clear terrain, and the one adjacent to it from which the charge is actually launched is also clear terrain. Cavalry charge and countercharge is resolved as a melee combat, following the prescriptions of paragraph 7.1 and 9.21. Great. Using the same procedure, though providing a +1 column right advantage on the modifier, and that's yes, you'll get a flank possibility as well. It's not possible to declare a charge against a unit that is beyond a stream. Remember, streams are not these ditches. What was up with ditches? I'm allowed to jump ditches, right? Streams are these things. A unit cannot declare a charge against an enemy cav unit that is adjacent to itself at the start of movement. If the charged cav unit is still in the hex after combat is resolved and losses are taken, it then, now this is not like countercharges I'm used to, it must immediately countercharge the initial attacking unit before the charging cav retreats. Countercharge is done exactly like a charge with parts, attacker and defender reversed. After the countercharge results are applied, the initially attacked cav retreats or routes or is eliminated. Cav that suffers a double retreat result in this process always retreats once. I think what this is all trying to say is that if you get a retreat result on the defending unit, you get to ignore it in order to do the countercharge first, and then you'll be affected by the retreat result. Otherwise, double retreat wouldn't happen, right? But it is possible the attacker could retreat as well, and I think they also would not retreat. They would get hit again as well. All right, let's get to dragoons because these are interesting. Cav fire, okay, this is an interesting one to me. Cav fire was a myth at this moment. At the distance of more than 40 meters, a pistol shot and a well-thrown stone had almost the same effect. In melee, an unloaded pistol is useless, and it does not serve to parry the blows. The only thing that could be done was throw it, because in the time it took to put it in the holster and extract your sword, you would have received a blow that would have detached an ear. Okay, so yes and no. I think the carousel is gone by this point. But again, I think there were still units using it when you got to the when you got to like the Age of Marlborough era, and certainly in earlier periods it was being used, where you had cav units in formation marching up towards each other or towards infantry or whatever, discharging their firearms and then coming back and getting back as they reload their weapon and just circling around shooting. All to the sound of amusement park rides. Okay, anyway. I think that's obsolete at this point. And it was a pretty iffy tactic, but it did allow them to not have to conduct the charges and still pretend that they were in a fight. Dragoons are cavalry units that fire on foot. They're marked with strength values in yellow. Oh, we got something that tells us what dragoons are. Okay, so these are dragoons. Baleare, Kohare, and we can look here, Baleare. Kohare is not here. Which is kind of disturbing because he has 2 units and should be able to. Do I have a Kohari infantry that I shouldn't? Yes, I do. Let's do this. Okay, so I've got to keep an eye out for strength points mixed in yellow, and it'll be on the infantry or the cav. And I may need to hunt down, because one of the things with the setup is there are more spaces, or sometimes less, than there are units present. And what do they say to do about that? Note that the number of hexes may not be corresponding to the total number of formation units. If there are more hexes than units, the owner player displays as he wishes. Sometimes there may be less because you've got dragoons or whatever. I don't know. Why don't I put both of these in this hex then? Fuck it. Okay. So we have a way of telling dragoons from everything else that I did not know we had. Each dragoon unit corresponds to a single infantry counter or 2 counters if on horseback. During setup, the owning player decides whether to deploy them on foot or on horseback. During the game, at the beginning of the movement step, every 2 mounted SPs stacked in the same hex can be replaced by a dismounted infantry SP or vice versa. This is a little disturbing. It sounds like you can just put any old infantry down without regard to any formation or even the unit or the unit that it's at. So for example, 4 cavalry SPs on 2 counters can form 2 infantry SPs in a single counter. Mounted dragoons can move freely but cannot end movement in an engagement zone unless stacked. At the beginning of the next movement step, they must dismount and must enter the line formation as soon as possible. It's not mentioned here, but it was somewhere else where they talk about some of the dragoon units are only mounted because there weren't enough units in their formation to be able to create an infantry unit. Like, I don't know if I've hit any of those, because for me, the only way I could tell, I didn't realize the yellow counter thing. The only way I could tell was that I had 2 counters with the same name with a horse, and 1 counter with that name with an infantry unit, and obviously I didn't catch all of them. Lucky me. I will, if I remember, go back and look. I think I deployed all my French as infantry then, I guess. But here, so for example, here I have Savoyon. And there he is. Yeah. So I should have either 2 horses or 1 infantry in each case, but it's possible that I fuck up and do not. So Holly I know I took care of. You know, I'm going to have to hunt through these and just look. Looky. Luckily there aren't a hell of a lot of them I can see. Like I'm not seeing any. See, I see the yellow in the corner, and that confuses me as well. Tron. Okay, I do not see a Tron. Tron, oh no, that's red. Yeah, I'm seeing the yellow in the corner, and I'm getting fucking confused by it. It's that hard for me. Okay, fuck it. I pretend I've got it all. All right, onward. Dragoons can move freely but cannot end the movement in an engagement zone unless stacked. At the beginning of the next movement step, they must dismount and must enter line formation as soon as possible. They cannot enter infantry enemy zones of control and cannot perform charges unless they are charged by enemy cavalry and are mounted. In this case, the charge procedure is used. Actually, it sounds like it's the countercharge procedure. Dragoons are considered cavalry for purposes of the TDR. I think that's even when they're dismounted, but I'm not sure. That's going to be hard to remember. All right, disorder and rout. A unit that suffers a disorder result from combat receives a disorder marker. Being disordered affects the way infantry or cavalry fights. Artillery is immune to disorder. A unit in disorder cannot melee or charge. Trying to remember if this is a period. I don't know if the artillery has been. I think the artillery is actually part of the military at this point. The gun crews used to be civilians, but I think by this point they're not. You still think that they could be, like, given that they could be chased off, you know, in every other period of warfare, I find it a little odd that they can't be disordered and their fire can't be hindered by being shot at or meleeed or whatever. If an infantry unit, what are we saying? Being disordered. A unit in disorder cannot melee or charge. If an infantry unit, it cannot remain in line and remain stationary until it is reorganized. Furthermore, it doesn't project an easy, which is like an engagement zone, I think it's called. Cav can move normally. Okay. Infantry can't move. And it isn't part of the line, I guess. Every type of unit, if attacked by Cav, retreats 2 hexes in the direction opposite to the direction of attack when possible, and in any case away from the attacking cavalry. They do not defensive fire before they retreat. The retreat is performed immediately upon placing the melee charge marker. It's kind of interesting. The infantry has no chance to retreat before combat if it's not disordered. But if it is disordered, it runs, and the cav won't chase it. I find that so hard. Like, shouldn't cav be, like, destroying disorganized mobs of infantry? I don't know. If infantry in command, it can fire offensively and defensively. It performs a single volley and then goes into feu de billaball automatically. If they suffer a new disorder result, they take a training die roll with +2 die roll modifier. If they fail, they rout. Otherwise, they just stay disordered. They cannot do changing of the ranks. Disordered markers are removed at the end of the turn in the reorder phase. Routed units. A unit that suffers a rout result or fails a TDR after a second disorder routs. A routed unit cannot engage in combat, not even fire combat. It no longer has a ZOC. If attacked or subjected to fire, it retreats 3 hexes, still able to run away from those horses. They just can't hurt them. I don't know what kind of charge this is. Any movement or fire other than that imposed by the state of rout is prohibited. Drift caused by panic. A routed unit must immediately retreat to the friendly edge of the map. West for the Franco-Spanish, east for the Austrians. Which way to north be? I feel like we're talking there and there. Yep. Looking for my compass rose. Yeah. Battery's dying. Okay, where are we? Routed units, drift caused by panic, yeah. Following the least expensive route and movement points and following the rules of retreat after combat. When a unit routes after combat or bombardment, it retreats 3 hexes. With each further activation, the routed unit moves another 3 hexes regardless of the type of terrain it crosses. Routed units may cross friendly troops. If they're forced to leave the map or encounter impassable hexes, they're eliminated. Now, you can recover from rout in this game. Always a point of contention, what is meant by rout. Here they say full panic. I mean, eventually, but if a routed, in the reorganization phase, routed or disordered units can try to recover to good order thanks to the contribution of NCOs and lower-ranked commissioned officers by performing a TDR. D10 is rolled, modified by, if you're out of command, zone of control, +2 for routed units. What's this standard +1? So normally a zone of control is a +1, but if you're routed or disordered, you are hurt more. If the TDR succeeds, the unit recovers a level of disorder. That is, from routed it goes to disorder, from disorder to good order. If the TDR fails, no effect. You know, it's kind of funny. I think summer storms rally checks in the face of the enemy actually are more brutal than this. And that's in the American Civil War, where units definitely did rout and reform, you know, on the battlefield. I'm a lot more iffy about units routing. Yeah, it could happen, but yeah, I don't know. I'm always iffy about it when you start going back this far, that units would reform. At the end of reorganization attempts, the turn marker is moved forward a space on the track and all smoke markers are removed, but not the few debilitables which remain on the map, and may or may not imply that there's smoke present in that hex. We're saying there's not, but all right. The city is not in good shape, and if the Austrians are able to continue the siege, it's going to be a problem. The Franco-Spanish player wins if he manages to drive away the Austrians and prevent their siege of the city of Piacenza, which would have been ruinous for the city. To do this, the Franco-Spanish player has 4 geographical objectives to be chosen and noted separately out of 8 locations. Let's see if I can find them. All right. They're just listed by name. Castellado. I'm thinking it's going to be on this side. I don't know. Okay, let's look for another one. Turo. Oh, this fuck. Here's Turo. That leads me to believe Castellado is going to be on this side. All right, let's keep looking. Garriga. That's here. Okay. There's Castellado. All right, so there's 3. Lemos. I don't know. Okay, don't know where that is. Mucinasso. Okay, we got a Mancello. There's Mucinasso. So what was the last one before that? Lemos. I know I saw this. One thing I could do is look on here, but the names aren't all on here either, because some of them are covered. And they'll be the same ones that I've got covered here. So yeah, I don't know where Lemos is. Probably don't want to pick that, since I can't find it. Montale. Montale's up here. Lemos has to be down here, right? God. I don't know. I should put markers on all of these. San Bonico. Well, we were up here. Oh, there's Lemos. Oh, good God. Thanks. Okay, Montale is over here. San Bonico. They could be at random, right? Because we jumped over up to here and then down. Are they doing them? They're doing them fucking alphabetical. Oh, that's brilliant. San Bonico and San Lazzaro. Okay. Well, here's San Bonico, I think. And San Lazzaro. I don't know where the fuck that is. All right, I'm going to put little markers down on those. Anyway, those are marked on the map with an angel symbol. Oh, there we go. So that's what that is. All right. Still not very helpful, because there's counters on top of it. I should have set these up before I set up any pieces. I didn't realize it was going to... So one of the problems, no hex numbers. Now, I am pretty sure that this company has hex number technology. So this is a decision made simply for making the game more physically attractive or something. You can make the hex numbers really, really pale though, and they're barely visible. And that works pretty well. You can do along the sides, and that wouldn't hurt anything, the way Avalon Hill used to do them. And you could do the way the gamers do them, which is maybe every 5 hexes have a row with numbers. There's just a number of ways you can do this without disrupting the visual elements. Personally, I see no problem with a pale gray number everywhere, but at the very least, a line. Because what this means is there is basically no way, let's say you want to play this and you need to take it down for a while or something like that. There's no way to record where things are. Now, granted, in a tactical war game, that's not very likely. Usually people, and it's a small map and everything, usually people manage to keep things on board. It doesn't look like it's going to be a terribly short game, though, is my feel. It just doesn't. Okay. So anyway, the Austrian player does not know these, but at the end of 12 game turns, all the way, he will check if the objectives chosen by the opponent are still in his possession. At the end of the game, I thought there was a... Oh, yeah, there is. 3 p.m., I guess, here. 15 hours. I think this is the 3 p.m. turn. But anyway, at the end of the game, check how many are by help by each player. If it's only 1, it goes to the Austrian. If it's 3 or more, the French-Spanish win. In the case of a conditional draw, either 2 each, then you count victory points to see who wins. And each flag is worth 5. Each enemy commander is worth victory points, routed units, eliminated units. are worth 1 each. And if that count is still even, it's just a draw. Otherwise, you know, it's a more marginal victory. You haven't necessarily succeeded. However, the game ends and the Austrian player wins an automatic at the end of 3 p.m. if the Franco-Spanish does not occupy at least one of the geographic objectives chosen. The French-Spanish player must reveal that the occupied one is one of his geographic locations. So you kind of express which direction you're going in with your forces by pointing to one of the things and saying, yeah, I succeed. And of course you can't lie. All right, let me get some tiddlywinks or something on these 8 spaces, and then I'll write down 4. And yeah, the missing one was under some counters. Wouldn't have been able to see it on either map there. So those are the 8. They're all kind of in this channel. Need to get 4 of them. Well, there's only 3 up here. All right. Am I missing one? No. So there's 4 down here, kind of 4 up here you could choose. You could conceivably try to take something weird, like, you know, take these 2 and these 2 or something like that. That looks hard. So I would kind of argue that you probably want to break, you probably want to figure out a way to break this, the Austrian line and get some significant advances somewhere. To the disadvantage, well, what's the terrain that I'm looking at here? All along here, they're dug in. And then this comes to some kind of canal or something, the Refudo. The Refudo, I think, is just a stream, as far as I can tell. It is not the Trebbia. It is not the Po. So, yeah. Oh, look. Roads go right into the water here. No crossings. Interesting. You're not allowed to cross the rivers, and yeah, whatever. So yeah, I'll probably choose, you know, a set that makes sense. To me, the most sensible is this, but there are other opportunities. You could convince me these 3 are close enough together. I just kind of feel like these guys down here look, if you can get a breakthrough, they look very plausible, and that means that these are the ones you want to go for. This looks like a big clusterfuck that, you know, it's more behind the wall and or the entrenchment and everything else. All right, well, that is Piacenza. I'm probably not going to get to play today because apparently I'm going out and I have to play some Raid because my normal, like, I'm probably going to leave the house before my normal start of a day of Raid or whatever. Like, there's a switch over at 5 p.m. This thing starts at 5:30. I'm okay getting there a little late, but maybe not too late. I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing this. I honestly don't. Except that being sociable is probably a good idea.